Have you ever pondered over what might happen if a war broke out between Venezuela and Guyana? Before we delve into this complex geopolitical issue, let's take a step back. Let us journey back in time to the early 20th century in Venezuela. In the jazz-filled era of the Roaring Twenties, Venezuela teetered on the edge of a game-changing revelation. Beneath its surface lay a treasure trove of black gold, oil. This discovery would thrust Venezuela into the global limelight, recasting it as one of the world's premier oil exporters. The once familiar Venezuelan scene drastically altered, with derricks sprouting up like wild mushrooms after a downpour, and oil facilities becoming the country's modern landmarks. The oil boom ignited a period of swift economic acceleration, akin to a rocket blasting off into the cosmos. Venezuela's economy began to flourish as the country reveled in the prosperity the oil wealth offered. It was as if the nation was a young adult who unexpectedly stumbled upon a colossal inheritance. The country's infrastructure enhanced, cities flourished, and the living standards ascended. It was an epoch of plenty, a golden age that saw Venezuela become the cynosure of many an eye. However, this speedily paced growth wasn't without its dangers. The newfound wealth brought with it the snags of mismanagement and corruption. The government, drunk on the influx of oil money, gradually started to dismiss other sectors of the economy. Agriculture, manufacturing, and other industries were neglected. The economy became a one-trick show horse, heavily reliant on the oil sector. The prosperity ushered in by the oil wealth, regrettably, was fleeting. The roots of Venezuela's current crisis were planted in these early years of oil-centered growth. As we are about to witness in the coming scenes, the repercussions of this overdependence on oil and the subsequent mismanagement of wealth have culminated in a desperate situation. A situation where a country, once the envy of many, is now wrestling with economic catastrophe and political chaos. A situation where its citizens, who once basked in the benefits of oil wealth, are now fighting to survive. So stay with us as we dissect the ascension and downfall of an oil titan and explore the potential implications of a conflict between Venezuela and Guyana. As the oil money flowed in, Venezuela saw a rapid rise in its living standards, but this prosperity was built on shaky foundations. The Venezuelan economy, once the envy of many, became a classic case of the resource curse, with the nation becoming overly reliant on its vast oil reserves. This overdependence on a single commodity meant that when oil prices were high, life was good. But when they fell, the economy took a hit. In the second half of the 20th century, the Venezuelan economy was booming. Oil revenues fueled an economic and social transformation, with the country becoming one of the wealthiest in Latin America. However, this prosperity masked an underlying fragility. The oil wealth led to a rise in corruption, with officials and business elites siphoning off large chunks of the country's wealth for their own gain. Moreover, the oil boom led to a widening gap between the rich and the poor. Wealth was concentrated in the hands of a few, leading to high levels of income inequality. The government, flush with oil money, neglected other sectors of the economy, leaving the country vulnerable to fluctuations in oil prices. In the 1980s, this vulnerability became apparent. Falling oil prices, combined with high levels of corruption and mismanagement, led to an economic crisis. This crisis, marked by high inflation and unemployment, continued into the 21st century, with the country experiencing one of the highest inflation rates in the world. The economic crisis led to widespread social unrest, with protests and strikes becoming a common occurrence. The government's response to this unrest was often heavy-handed, leading to further alienation and discontent among the population. Amid this turmoil, a new political force emerged, promising change and a break from the past. However, this promise of change proved to be a mirage. Instead of leading the country towards prosperity, this new political force led Venezuela further down the path of economic and social despair. With the economy in freefall, a new political force emerged, promising change, but instead led the country further down the path of despair. Enter Hugo Chavez, a charismatic leader who pledged to channel the vast oil wealth of Venezuela toward the upliftment of the underprivileged and the marginalized. Chavez, a fiery orator and veteran military man, won over the hearts of millions. His philosophy, known as Chavismo, initially made considerable progress in alleviating poverty and bridging social disparities. Public services were widened, education was made more reachable, and it seemed as if the oil-laden nation was at last heading towards a prosperous future. Yet, underneath this facade, the roots of fiscal mismanagement and corruption were being planted. Chávez's administration seized control of private enterprises, leading to a decrease in overseas investment. The state oil institution was exploited as a source of funding for social programs, with negligible effort put into reinvesting in its infrastructure or diversifying the economy. When Chávez departed in 2013, his successor, Nicolás Maduro, assumed power. However, Maduro lacked allure and his knack for managing the conflicting interests within the government. The issues that had been simmering during Chávez's reign began to emerge. Corruption increased, the economy took a nosedive, and burgeoning social programs started to collapse. As inflation rose, the value of the currency fell, leading to a shortage of essential goods and services. The regime's response of increased controls only worsened the situation. The middle class began to vanish and poverty rates surged. Despite all this, the Maduro regime tightened its hold on power. Opposition figures were either imprisoned or forced into exile. Public protests were squashed with severe repression. The once thriving democracy of Venezuela had transformed into an authoritarian regime. The hopeful promises of a prosperous future, the Venezuelan people morphed into a nightmare of poverty and oppression. Chávez, along with other leaders who joined anti-Western regimes such as Iran, left their countries in ruins due to their policies and mismanagement. Under the leadership of Chávez and Maduro, Venezuela transitioned from a country bursting with oil wealth and promise to a nation in the throes of a historic economic and humanitarian crisis. Today, Venezuela stands at a crossroads, with a government seeking to divert attention from its failures by stoking nationalist sentiments over a territorial dispute. This dispute, known as the Essequibo dispute, has been a contentious issue between Venezuela and Guyana since 1966, and it's been recently reignited by the Venezuelan regime. As the Venezuelan economy continues to crumble under the weight of hyperinflation, food shortages, and rampant corruption, the government is not looking for solutions but distractions. The Essequibo region, controlled by Guyana but claimed by Venezuela, has become the perfect scapegoat. The regime is organizing a referendum to assert its claim over Essequibo, a move seen as a show of strength against the rising opposition. But what does this mean for the Venezuelan people? Instead of focusing on resolving the economic crisis, the government is stoking the flames of nationalism and division. This move is a clear attempt to measure its mobilization power before the 2024 elections and distract the populace from the real issues at hand. This gambit, however, is not without consequences. The referendum has already begun to cause divisions within the opposition, weakening the united front against the regime. Furthermore, there are concerns that the government may be seeking to create a climate of war or confrontation as a pretext to suspend the upcoming presidential elections. Adding to the tension, the Venezuelan armed force is building infrastructure near the Essequibo, hinting at potential militarization. In response, Brazil has strengthened its defense in the border region, indicating that the dispute might escalate beyond Venezuela and Guyana. As Venezuela stands on the brink, the future of its people hangs in the balance. The Venezuelan government's attempts to distract and divide may buy it time, but it's a dangerous game that could have far-reaching consequences not just for Venezuela, but for the entire region. The people of Venezuela deserve a government that prioritizes their well-being and future, not one that uses national disputes as a smokescreen for its failures. From an oil-rich nation to a country in crisis, the story of Venezuela is a cautionary tale of how mismanagement and corruption can lead to disaster. We have seen the journey of this once prosperous nation, from the birth of an oil giant to the rise and fall of its economy and the emergence of a dictatorship. Venezuela, a country blessed with vast oil reserves, once stood as a beacon of economic prosperity. The discovery of oil brought about an economic boom, transforming the nation into one of the wealthiest in Latin America. However, the prosperity was short-lived. The oil wealth that was supposed to uplift the nation became the very source of its downfall. The economy took a turn for the worse as the government failed to diversify and relied heavily on oil revenues. As oil prices fluctuated, so did the fortunes of the Venezuelan people. The economic downturn paved the way for the rise of Hugo Chavez and later Nicolas Maduro, whose regimes brought about rampant corruption and economic mismanagement. Today, the Venezuelan people are grappling with an unprecedented crisis. The Maduro regime continues to hold on to power, using tactics such as the Essequibo dispute to divert attention from the country's internal problems. The Essequibo region, controlled by Guyana but claimed by Venezuela, has become the latest pawn in the regime's game of power. The regime's actions have not only deepened the crisis, but also divided the opposition, creating a climate of confrontation and possibly leading to a suspension of the upcoming presidential elections. Meanwhile, international partners like Iran are further complicating the situation, adding to the turmoil that the Venezuelan people have to endure. As we watch the unfolding crisis in Venezuela, we must ask ourselves, what lessons can we learn from this tragic story? And more importantly, how can we help the Venezuelan people in their struggle for a better future? Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more insightful videos like this one.